sometimes taking a break makes you better. We talked about resting and healing and self-care. Sometimes walking is not failure. You're just moving forward at a different pace.
Welcome to Seriously Catherine, a self-confidence podcast for women who want to be taken seriously in the world of business. Here's your guest host, Dympna Weil.
So welcome back to everyone to Prescribing Possibility and our final podcast takeover to close out August. I have to thank all the listeners for giving me your time, giving me a chance, and exploring some other ideas and topics, as well as some possibilities for this month alongside me. This really has been an absolute joy and an honor, and I thank you for reaching out with your kind words. It really has meant a lot to me. And one of the things that I am so intrigued by in my own work is the connection between the head and the heart. In the framework that I use, I look at it as intellect meeting intuition. Today, our esteemed guest is someone who really is the walking, talking personification of that concept. So we'll be joined by News 10's Lydia Kulbida, who is an Emmy Award-winning anchor, an Emmy-nominated reporter, and she is just a wonderful human who really does so much, not only by sharing the news with us each evening, but she also just does so much for the community here. So we're all in for a treat. But first, a hot take brought to you by Paint and Sip. My hot take is about a wonderful new local business that just opened here in the community in June, and it's called Saratoga Springs Community Acupuncture, founded by Lauren and Jacob. They're a married couple of acupuncturists, and they're dedicated to providing accessible, high-quality care to their community. So I stumbled upon this practice. I actually just noticed a little sign out on the sidewalk on Lake Avenue across from Walton Whitman and the police department. They are in one of those buildings right there on the corner, and they grew up locally. They have always been captivated by Saratoga's history of healing. When they realized that there were no other community acupuncture clinics in the area, they knew this was the perfect place to start their practice. So I will just explain a little something in case you're not familiar with the difference between just acupuncture practices and a community acupuncture practice. So community acupuncture is what it sounds like. It's when you go into an office or a clinic and they have multiple beds, kind of like massage beds that are set up, and you receive your acupuncture. You're fully dressed. Just, the procedure is usually done on your arms or your legs or your head, the back of your neck. But you're in a room with other people. Oftentimes they have curtains just to give you a little bit of privacy, but you're not in a closed room with a closed door. The purpose of that is because it offers unique benefits that enhance the effectiveness of the treatments. And what Jacob and Lauren say is that for those new to acupuncture, the group setting can be reassuring as people will see others relaxing, sometimes napping. I am guilty of that, with the needles in place. And so there's something truly special about walking into a room full of people healing together. I am someone who has benefited from acupuncture for a long time. I have had migraines since I was a teenager. They got really bad when I was in medical school. Medications were not helpful, and I had a lecture when I was in med school at NYU. And it was given by a woman who was an acupuncturist in Manhattan. She had been a cardiologist in China, and when she moved here, she didn't want to redo all of her training. So instead, she, as a cardiologist, just decided she was going to practice Chinese medicine and acupuncture here. So she gave us a lecture on acupuncture, and I went to see her to help me with my migraines. And it was the first time I had had relief in a very long time. So since then, I have worked with an acupuncturist on and off. It's just a maintenance for me in a lot of ways. And so I am delighted to have Lauren and Jacob here because a lot of times it can be a lot more affordable when you go in the community setting. So if you have not ever tried it, but you've been curious, this is a great opportunity for you to give it a go. They are very kind, very gentle, very knowledgeable, and their office is absolutely beautiful. That's my hot take for now. Well, welcome back. I am so thrilled and grateful to our final guest on the podcast takeover. This is the wonderful and incomparable Lydia Kulbida. Lydia, thank you so much for being with me today.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Dympna, and stop making me blush.
So I have to tell you, when we moved up here in 2012, we moved up from the tri-state, and we were fishing around for our favorite news station, and the only one that we could agree upon was you and John Gray. So we were fast friends even before you knew me.
Oh, wow.
So for those who don't know, Lydia and I go back several years now because I had the pleasure of working with her husband at Bellevue as an OBGYN hospitalist. So I did a little bit of snooping into the past. And yeah, so hold on tight, everybody. This is going to be fun. But I found out that on your first day at News 10, you anchored the coverage of President Obama's visit to the Capital Region.
Yes, he was at HVCC.
What was that like?
I feel like back then, it was not what it is now. I'd already covered when Bill Clinton had come to Springfield, Massachusetts, when I worked in that market. So you're used to the Secret Service sweeps that happen before a president comes to visit. You're used to the crowds that come. But I feel like now, how many years is it later? 15 years since that happened. It's almost a different world covering that. There's more security. There are bigger crowds. I feel like I did it at a good time when it was more manageable.
I mean, how do you get used to Secret Service sweeps?
Well, so here we are, two women chatting, and OBGYNs, and you're a mom, so you know all these things. My first time that I covered a presidential visit to our local community, I had just had a baby, and I was still nursing. And so I had to bring my pump and other equipment with me to the Air Reserve base where the president was going to fly in. Back then, this was in 1996. And we had to leave all of our bags in a room, and the Secret Service would then go through them. And all I could think of was, I hope whoever is going through my bag is a father.
Right.
And knows what he's looking at when he sees all of this equipment in this bag. But yeah, in the middle of waiting, I had to ask for, is there a bathroom that I can use that has an outlet in it, and pump, and then go home to my baby later that night.
Right, and don't spill the milk.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So you've covered political conventions. You've piloted an F-16.
Briefly. Very briefly on that one. The only thing that I can say that I am proud of between being in a plane with the Air Force Thunderbirds and the Navy Blue Angels was that I did not puke, poop, or pass out, the 3 Ps that you could do when you are undergoing all of those G-forces in a plane.
That is incredible. You were interested in this all the way back in high school.
In high school, cemented it for television broadcast news. But I'd always been interested in news and wanted to be a newspaper writer when I was growing up, and wanted to be a correspondent for quite some time. I'm first generation Ukrainian American, born in this country. My parents emigrated here after the war, and watching the news was important for us. And I remember a few things hitting me. The correspondents weren't pronouncing things correctly from Eastern Europe.
Right.
I grew up speaking Ukrainian first, learned English in kindergarten, so I had a better grasp of the language. And in speaking with my parents and knowing what they had gone through in escaping Eastern Europe and the contact that we still had with family there that had to be coded in letters that could be read when you sent. I knew that the whole story wasn't getting out from there. And I thought, well, I want to grow up and find the truth and tell the whole story of what's happening there. And that was my first interest in news. We always watched TV news together. We always read newspapers together. I mean, it was a big thing on Saturday night. My mother and I would walk to the corner store to get the Sunday papers, early so we could start reading things together. In high school, we started a TV club. I think it was my junior year. And we all took turns being a reporter, being an anchor, being a producer, a director, a writer. And I realized if I was a writer and someone else was reading my words, I didn't think they read them as well as I had written it. So call it the arrogance of youth. But I thought, okay, if I'm going to write for TV news, because I noticed that when you put words and video together, it could have a much more powerful effect, then I want to be the one reading those words. I don't want to just write for someone else.
Right. Full ownership. So did high school Lydia ever see herself anchoring the news or covering presidents' local visits or any of these things?
Oh, yes. Much bigger aspirations.
Ooh, tell me.
My high school senior essays for some colleges was that I was going to be the first female solo network anchorwoman.
I love it.
Because at that time, there were none. Or if there were, you had to share. Connie Chung had to share. Barbara Walters had to share. Little did I know when I was writing those essays in 1984, it took, do you remember when Katie Couric, I can't remember when it was, but it was a long time before Katie Couric became a solo network female anchorwoman.
Right. Like, I wonder, because so many occupations, they have a gender bias and they always have, they still do. Did that ever figure into your calculus? Did it limit you in what you were thinking, or you just didn't, you knew it was going to be a factor, but it didn't really matter to you?
Well, in one station years ago, they gave me a beat. You know how different reporters have been education or business or something. So they gave me a beat. They called it the woman's beat. And I had a Whitney Houston song, I'm Every Woman, would come on every time one of my stories would air. And I remember the news director, when he gave me this beat and was telling me about the stories he envisioned, he goes, breast cancer, uterine cancer. And I was like, women are about a lot more than gynecological cancers. And he said, well, a skateboard park, how is that a woman's issue? And I said, I bet you there's a mom who fought for that skateboard park so her kids could have a safe place to skateboard. And it took him a while to figure out that any story can be a woman's story. So I remember the first one that we aired for that series was about a female mechanic in our community who would hold free monthly workshops for other women to learn things about their cars so they would not feel like they're getting taken advantage of going somewhere because they're a woman.
Yeah, and I wondered if there was a man's beat, right?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably
right?
not.
So if you could trace back one moment or experience, I know you mentioned like reading the news with your family, but was there like one moment or experience that you can remember that just ignited that passion?
My general upbringing. Again, I'm born in 1966, so through the 70s, my parents would take me to protests in New York City, to free dissidents in Ukraine. So there was a lot of emphasis on, trying to get justice. Also, and a story out that wasn't being told about Ukraine at that time. So here we are at a point where we're heading into the third Ukrainian Independence Day this August under a full-fledged invasion by Russia, and Ukraine is in the news all the time now.
Yeah.
So both of my parents have passed since, but I just wonder what they would have thought if they were alive today.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, how interesting coming full circle and now being a reporter, reporting on stories that are still about, the limitations on what's coming in terms of news, and being a mom and seeing what's happening. How do you manage your emotions or your personal views and feelings when you're relaying the news to people. I can only imagine, relaying the news, staying impartial, right? But how do you rectify that with all that's going on, not just with Ukraine, but with any news story?
It hit me once, not long after our second child. We had tossed to a story that a reporter was doing on a man who had confessed in a police video to shaking his child to death. In the police video, you see the man reenacting it with a doll. And it was the first time I had seen it, was when this story aired. And it just shook me to my core because I had a little baby about that age at that time. Yeah, I almost cried on air. There are times, 9/11, when we were on the air 24/7 and we don't know what's happening in New York City, but in our community here in the Albany area, you see people stretched around the block at the Red Cross to go donate blood because they feel the need to do something. It makes you emotional. And there are times that you can't hold it in and these things come out on air, but for the most part, you can separate your emotions from the work that you're doing. And I know as a physician, you can do the same.
I appreciate that. But part of what a lot of us as physicians struggle with then is you hold it in, but then you don't necessarily look after yourself afterwards. So
Yes.
How do you look after yourself afterwards?
Well, there's mental self-care, and then there's physical self-care. And it took me a long time to realize that the two of those actually go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I was very active growing up. I danced for 20 years, and, I had Ukrainian dancing, you had Irish step dancing, both very physical activities.
Yep.
I did track in high school. I taught aerobics and weight training in college. But then there comes a time, between working, you have kids, sandwich generation duties, if you're taking care of elderly parents or in-laws, you always put yourself last on the back burner. And as your physical health goes down, you don't really realize, it's like the whole frog in the boiling water. You don't realize how much of an effect that physical well-being has on your mental well-being until it's kind of gone. I was moderating a heart health forum for Ellis in early 2012. And I remember being so impressed by the speakers. There were women who were heart attack survivors. There were cardiologists. And everybody was talking about the importance of self-care and the physical well-being to your heart health, that I raised my hand at the end of that forum and pledged to everybody, I'm going to run the Freihofers Run for Women that year and do a marathon by the time I'm 50. Well, what happened after that? Life. I went back to taking care of my kids, taking care of my in-laws, taking care of everybody else but me. And you just keep going until push comes to shove. There was a great New York Times essay written by a woman runner during COVID. I wish I could remember the coach that she was quoting in there, but 3 words really stood out. Mood affects your actions. So you don't have to wait until you feel good to do something that will make you better. You just go do it to make yourself feel good. And that's what I ended up doing with the exercise. We were going on a family vacation in 2016 where I didn't want to be left behind while everybody was walking through the hills of Prague, where our older daughter was on a study abroad. And so I started walking, and we get to Prague, and hey, nobody left me behind. I could keep up with the family walking up all these hills. And we came home, and I just started walking further because it made you feel good. And next thing you know, I'm running. Next thing you know, I'm looking for an exercise class. Next thing you know, I'm doing a Spartan race.
And Tough Mudders and
on Killington Mountain by myself, and 8.5 hours later coming down the mountain going, wow, I can't believe I just did that.
That's amazing.
So it really did not connect to me until probably the year I was turning 50. Maybe that was it.
Wow.
The whole physical well-being connection to mental well-being, and how physical self-care and mental health care are really connected.
Yeah, that's a profound lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I learned that lesson during COVID when I was unable to really do a lot of activity, still not able to dance. I learned that was my self-care. So I totally understand that connection, intimately. So it sounds like, and you can tell me where I'm wrong, but it sounds like you found your work-life harmony through movement.
Yes, but it took a long time of inaction to realize that I just had, it's like that darn Nike saying, just do it. It wasn't really pretty or good when I started moving again, but you just keep going through it.
And then when you are at work, you're on.
Yeah.
And you are on for everyone to see. And that has to be a different sort of exhausting, I would imagine.
In one way, social media helped with that. In another way, boy, am I glad social media was not around when I started my career, because I don't know if my skin was thick enough back then to have taken some of the comments. But social media is an outlet for me to show everybody that it's not all sunshine and roses. You know, yes, I have to be put together and professional and everything on air. But, you know, I'll talk about the times that I had a terrible race on social media, and people will commiserate and will say, okay, this is how I got through having a bad time working out, or this is how I got through, a bad time balancing work life, or this is how I got through, being a member of the sandwich generation. And so that's the positive part about social media that I embrace, is the sharing of things that can help each other.
Yeah, I think that's where I find the strength in it too. It's not all of the glitzy photos of this is how life is so rosy. It's the connection and finding the community. And that's one of the things I really admire about you, is that you share all of those, the harder sides, right? Like when you're a runner, you're very accomplished, you've done a bunch of marathons now, and you shared your journey when you were going through your hip surgery.
Oh, yeah. That was
Tell us,
humbling, because did not go as well as I thought. Now, the surgery was perfect.
Right.
Love my surgeon. Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Brilliant. But I'm used to doing things well, and the fact that 3 weeks after surgery, I had to go back on a walker because I had pushed myself too much was humbling. It was a reminder that sometimes you do have to sit still and heal and recover before you can push yourself to be back where you were before.
Yeah, sometimes that recovery is necessary.
Yeah.
We have to be patient with ourselves.
Oh, I'm so impatient.
Yeah, we all are, especially when we live busy lives and we're used to going. It is humbling to have to sit still and be patient.
Yeah, the whole recovering from hip surgery took longer than I thought, so I couldn't start marathon training when I had planned, so that just got shortened. So that marathon that year was under turtle power.
But you ran a marathon.
I walked it, but I finished it. And now I'm stuck doing another one because I don't want that slow time being my last time.
Well, that's impressive. That is amazing. And so you're running in the fall, is that?
Yes, this October.
Well, we'll be rooting for you. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can't get through a 5K. I can walk it. That's about it.
You know what? So I started a new training method with this last marathon, Jeff Galloway's run-walk method. So I'm only running 90 seconds, and then I immediately take a 30-second walk break. And I am faster than when I tried to push myself running all the way through. I had a mindset always that I have to go, keep going. Taking a break is a failure. This guy, Jeff Galloway, in his app says, walking is not a failure. And it took, I don't know how many times of him saying that, as I was training, to finally believe him and see the results that he's right. Sometimes taking a break makes you better. We talked about resting and healing and self-care. Sometimes walking is not failure. You're just moving forward at a different pace.
Right. It's just a little slower than what you're doing when you're running. It's no different.
And in the end, the cumulative, I'm faster now. So it all works.
Your time's going to be better.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. See the lessons we learn, right?
Yes. You're never too old to learn a lesson.
That is so true. One of the ways in which I see, our work worlds are so similar is that, putting our emotions to the side. And, you also have a very unique perspective that I'd love to explore if you're okay with it. And if not, that's totally fine too. But being a physician family, you also have had particular insight into the world of medicine. And so I'm curious about your perspectives because one of the things I notice is that as I've been kind of healing and having some perspectives on my own journey in medicine, I had no real idea how much that affected the people around me, my training, my caring for patients, my schedule, all the things. So in your view, how has healthcare changed over time? How has having a physician in the family affected your family life?
I think when you think about healthcare from when we were kids and the family doctor we had growing up, boy, has it changed tremendously. Putting aside all the technological advances that have extended our lives and made our lives better, and battling disease with surgeries and medicines that weren't around back then, that's all the great stuff.
Right.
The whole connection with that one physician who knew you, all of you, and your family, that feels like I wish there was a way to bring that back. It's actually, my husband and Nick and I were talking about that last night when I told him, that's one of the things we were going to be talking about. And he also recalled the family physician that he had growing up, and spending time and knowing the patient as a person and as a whole within the family bond. Now, with so many specialists, it's great, but who knows you?
They know the parts.
Right. And this is when it's so much more important for the patient to be their own advocate. Trishna Begum did a story recently about two sisters who both ended up having colon cancer, and the one who was younger kept being told, "No, that can't be a wrong age." One thought where she said, "You've just met me, but I have had this body for 28 years," or I can't remember how old she was. So she knows her body and what feels right, what doesn't feel right. And that's what I feel like is the big issue for people as patients nowadays, is to be that advocate.
Right, especially because we're so at the mercy of insurance companies.
Yes.
And because a lot of our insurance coverage is tied to, employment, it shifts, and it really does take away that connection. That was always my favorite part of being an OBGYN, was sitting in the exam room and really knowing my patients, And so when people would have to move around, it was hard for them, and it was hard to lose patients because of that. They would go to another practice because I have to. My insurance changed, Some parts of the medical culture are so surprising to people, I think. Are there some parts of the medical culture that surprised you that you have been privy to because of your connection to medicine? Like, the training process or
we got married right as he started his OB residency. So we had no honeymoon because, residency starts in July. We were married in August, so honeymoon had to wait until the following year. Yeah, that training back then in the early 90s, when he did his cancer rotation, I remember had a very tough attending that he and another resident, they would have to be in the hospital, getting ready to round at like 5 a.m, and then I wouldn't see him again until dinner the next day. He'd come home, I'd have dinner ready for him, he'd fall asleep, and then get ready to go do it. Yeah, and those were a hard couple of months.
Yeah, you don't forget those.
No.
How do you, because you see it in the news too, right? So it's interesting, I'd imagine, living it and then reporting on it. So,
well, having him easily accessible by phone is great when we're doing medical stories. And I read something that a reporter has written, because we'll go through scripts, and I go, that doesn't sound quite right. And so having him be able to break down medical stories very quickly for me and very easily, that's a blessing.
I would say, because sometimes they come in so quickly, things, I get phone calls and texts like, is this accurate? Is that true? Is there really lead and arsenic in tampons? Should I not use them? I'm like, it's fine. There's less in them than there is in like the drinking water. It's, it's all hype on TikTok. But, there are things that we get to see, I think, how it affects our family, like, missing things that, you try and be at everything, but you can't be at everything, and how that can affect, just everyday life.
I actually hadn't realized how that did make an impact on our kids until just recently our oldest was interviewed for a video they played before the Ellis Gala where Nick was honored with Neil Golub. And she recalled coming home after school, opening up the microwave, and there was a cup of coffee or some food that he had started to heat up, but then he got called away to the hospital or to the office. She could always see him, responding to colleagues, to patients, and she saw how hard he worked. And I hadn't realized how much they were seeing when they saw that. Here she was as a young woman talking about it.
It's both, you see the good of it, right? But you also see, how you also see the other parts of that.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it also, there are the effects on our families. And, my daughter has mentioned things like that too, but the overall effect is like the pride, of what you do. Yep. But it does take a little bit of a toll for sure. I wonder, with your proximity, have you ever had like a life-changing like revelation when you've been doing the news, whether it's related to healthcare or to any of the news stories that you've come across?
I don't know if they're life-changing. They're things that I have done that I go, well, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah.
When I was pregnant with our second, I was going to be in a blimp, the Hood blimp in Western Mass, and there's no bathroom. It's not like, they hidden in It's like a little cage. And so I knew I had to stop drinking a certain time before we went up.
Right.
In the blimp, because, again, no bathroom in a blimp. So between not drinking, being up in the blimp for hours, and then by the time I got home, I was so dehydrated. And thank goodness, we didn't live too far from his office then. He ran, got a couple of bags of saline, threw them over a lamp on the couch in our living room, and pumped me up at home. And so there's certain things I go, never going to do that again.
Right. Took the little wilted flower.
Oh, okay.
Are there any other, reflection points or anything that you would like to share about?
Everybody's work-life balance is different. You figure out your boundaries.
Right.
You figure out what works for you, your partner, your kids, your family. The whole comparing yourself to someone else's, whether it's their work-life balance, whether it's their life, whether it's their work, comparison really is the thief of joy. Finding peace and happiness in what you have and what you can achieve was another lesson, long time coming. But once you get it, wow, it's a relief.
The interesting thing, you are such a light, and you shed so much. You share so much of yourself with the community. That's one thing I did want to talk about, actually. You are someone who gives so much of yourself to so many different causes, whether it is Kelly's Angels, whether it is, emceeing the Ellis Gala or the Summer Spectacular. You are often out and about in the world and locally, and that is something that I truly admire. How do you manage that with being somebody so recognizable?
Not well at first. And it was one of those things where I think it was emceeing Women's Night Out, hearing from all the speakers when that event used to have speakers, and they all talked about you have to say no, you can't pour from an empty cup. When the oxygen masks drop down in the airplane, you're supposed to put yours on first before you put on anybody else's. And you hear that and you go, yeah, but you don't really do it when you go home. So yes, I was doing all those things you mentioned. I was our church president of in South Troy. I ran our dance group, and I ran myself into the ground. And that was part of, the time that physical care was not a big part of my life. And you have to take that look and say, what can I do that is going to leave a little bit of me for me? And so you end up having to say no. And that's another one of those lessons that takes you many years. I feel like women nowadays are learning that lesson younger. Go ladies.
Yeah. And I think it's also important, particularly when you're the mother of girls, to teach them that that's okay.
Yes, that you want to give back. You want to help people, but you have to save a little bit of yourself so that you have energy and time with your family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been just a joy and so incredibly profound. So I have one other final kind of question. I have a lot actually, but
Go
I
for
could
it.
go on all day long.
Go for it.
So could you recommend a book or a podcast or a resource that has had like a significant impact on you?
I don't know that there's one. I take little bits of things from everywhere. And when I find it, I like to share it.
Yep.
So that New York Times essay by that woman runner, I blasted that out to everyone I knew on social media because I thought it was so good and such a wake-up call to just get moving. Don't wait for the time to be right. Don't wait for feeling great. Just do it and you will feel great. I don't know that there's one that I always go back to, but anytime I find something like you, I will share.
Thank you.
I feel like we've had a great conversation.
I know.
And I can't recap it now.
Well, I think the whole totality really is that you are a woman who, in my view, really represents someone who practices what she preaches. And maybe that took some time to get there.
Yeah, I don't want to come off as like I knew exactly what I was doing. It was a long and winding road.
Right. And that's okay. And
Yeah.
I think that's an important takeaway for our listeners. It's an important takeaway for me because it's a work in progress, And I think so many of us can identify with wanting life to be perfect and wanting, the school bag and the school lunch to be perfect. And none of those things are perfect because perfect doesn't really exist, right? But you really do walk the walk and you share such important stories with us. I have to make sure I get it right because I do not want to butcher that. You've done these wonderful stories that have gotten all this recognition. You're an Emmy-winning anchor. You're an Emmy-nominated reporter. And you bring wonderful stories to us.
And that's why I got into this, because I wanted to tell other people's stories. I got to tell you, when you first asked me to come here and talk about myself, I was like, I don't like doing that. I had a news director who yelled at me for not putting what we call stand-ups in a story. That's when you see the reporter in the middle of the story. And he would tell me, how do they know you're doing the story? And I'm like, because they hear my voice.
Yeah.
They see me at the beginning and the end of it. Why do they need to see me at the middle? I'm here to tell other people's stories. And I love doing that to this day.
Well, you can tell. I mean, every time you're telling a story, we connect with you. And that gives us trust in what we're hearing, But it's been really special to get to hear your story and your take on life and learn from you some pearls and wisdom. So I really just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sitting with us and sharing some of your life wisdom and pearls and telling us a little bit of your story.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dympna.
Oh, thanks for being here, Lydia. Well, my personal lesson is that it's okay to try something new and be willing to fail. I tried something very scary this month. This was terrifying. I have never done anything like this before. I've been a guest on podcasts. That was terrifying. But to host a podcast was a different sort of animal. I had no idea how to do it. I became increasingly more anxious as it grew near, and I was really afraid of making a giant fool of myself and embarrassing myself and all the things. I was worried about how my voice would sound. When I found out it was going to be on YouTube, I was worried about my chins. I was worried about the fact that I break out in hives when I'm like passionately talking about things. But it was too hot to wear mock turtlenecks, so screw it. I was just going to have hives. I started getting nervous and anxious about all sorts of things. At a certain point, I had to stop the runaway train of negativity in my brain and just think for a moment well, why did I do this if all it's bringing me is all of this angst? I had to go back to why did I do this? And the reason I did this is because I truly believe that I have a lot of different life experiences, different sorts of life experiences that when they come together, I have things to share. And my experiences have taught me a lot of different lessons. And they go from, medicine to, I studied psychology. And so my interest in what, Gina Moffa had to share goes back to when I was studying psychology at NYU, talking with Corey Feist from the, Dr. Lorna Breen Foundation really hit a nerve because of the enormous number of physicians who die by suicide, one a day. The suicidal ideation that I experienced as an intern. I went back to why did I do this? Because people are suffering, and I know that from writing, when I share things in writing, people have gotten back to me and said, thank you for sharing because I now feel less alone. And this was an opportunity for me to share a little more in a little different way, and hopefully some people feel a little less alone. That, to me, is far more important than feeling a little uncomfortable. So much like Glennon Doyle can say, we can do hard things. Yeah, med school's hard. Residency's hard. Sharing how I'm feeling and making maybe someone feel a little tiny bit less alone, that's not hard. I feel like that's my obligation as a human. That's my business and life lesson for today. Do something to make someone else feel heard and seen today. You don't know how that will influence their day or their life. This week's Saratoga Lifestyle segment is brought to you by Saratoga Living's After Hours. Do you drink and do you know things? Well, if you do, you need to check out the 14 bars around town that are offering trivia night. You can go any night of the week, Monday through Friday, and find trivia of all sorts. There's DJ trivia, Harry Potter trivia, office trivia, Family Feud trivia. So from West Side Sports and King's Tavern to Harvey's, Carson's, Woodside, and Bailey's, the list goes on. And in the article behind the paywall, you will get all the details for where these trivia nights are occurring. There are repeat customers that are going every single week and having a blast. If you haven't gone yet, you might just want to check that out because it sounds like people are absolutely loving it, coming from all over to just go to their favorite bars and trying out new ones. So you can go to their Substack, which is in the bottom in our show notes. Have a look, figure out where you're going to go on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and enjoy some trivia.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you want to connect with me, slide into my DMs on Instagram. My handle is Catherine Hover.